Hey, George.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. And yourself?
Not too bad. It's been out in the garage working on stuff most of the day.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, it's sweaty.
Yeah. I was cutting some grooves in that box, and it was a little warm.
Yeah.
And
We
humid.
built a makeshift cage around one of our gardens because the rats like to eat our plants.
Plants are pretty delicious.
Hey, Kathy.
Hey, Kathy.
I think you might be muted. I'm going to turn my audio off because I'm going to make a couple quick loud cuts, and I'll be right back.
Hey, George, it's Kathy. If you could position your camera down, we could actually see the cuts. Right now, we can only see the hangers. I can see your face.
Sorry, yeah, I was just preparing some stuff. But yeah, if you want to watch me cut up some some cleats. I can actually switch
Well, I
to
mean, that's a lot better than looking at your garage door opener.
Yes. Let's see. I have a
Oh,
second.
you're upside down now.
I
Oh,
am.
there we go.
So I,
Thanks.
just to prepare a little bit, I have some kind of longer stalks. So I ripped these down earlier. I'm actually going to re-rip them at 45 just because it wasn't very clean. So when I started this project to make my French cleat wall, which I can show off a little bit. Let me direct my camera the other way. When I started my project to make my wall, I was thinking, oh, I'm going to go get some 3/4 inch plywood, and then I'll use like a circular saw with an edge guide to cut everything down. That did not work very well. So I actually went out and bought a DeWalt table saw, which makes it a lot easier. Hey, welcome.
So, George, when you put up the wall,
Mhm.
how did you decide the spacing on the 3/4 inch? I mean, how did you decide the spacing on the cleats?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are a lot of different kind of views on it. And if you check on the internet, people will say, oh, you need to do really far apart. You need to do close. It doesn't really matter. For me, I wanted to make sure that at least one of the thicknesses of my cleat, so like the mating side, would fit in there. And then I gave it a little bit more wiggle room. So my cleats are about 2.5 inches, I believe. Actually, let me grab my tape measure. You can see. This piece might be easier. So my cleats are about, they're just a little shy of 3 inches. So the way I did that is what I did is I ripped strips of plywood down to about 6 inches. And then I set it up, each of those strips up on the table saw that tilted at 45 degrees and split them in half, or roughly in half. So it came out a little bit less than 3. I knew I wanted spacing that, turn it so that you can see a little bit here, but I wanted spacing that my cleat would at least fit, if I can do this down, fit in there nicely, and that I would have some wiggle room here. So I think what I did is I just kind of took my measurement and then added about 1/2 inch to it. So this is about 3.5 inches that we have here. What that does is it just gives me a clearance if I'm kind of shuffling stuff and want to lift it. You can see that this will actually clear if the top of my cleat hits the bottom of the cleat above it. Usually when you're taking stuff out of cleats, if you're only using one cleat on the back, it doesn't matter quite as much because you're always going to take it out at like a tilt. So you can have your spacing be pretty close. If you're working with some heavier pieces, like cabinets or like my drill station, which I can show you, I actually have, this camera's hard. I have multiple cleats on the back of this because of the weight. And with those multiple cleats, it gets harder to take it off the wall at an angle. So you might actually have to lift straight up and then pull out. So that's the spacing that I decided that I wanted to be able to do that.
George, would you mind showing that one more time?
Thanks.
It blinked out when you showed it.
Yeah, so this is one of my bigger tool holders. Sorry, my camera, everything's backwards. One of my bigger tool holders. So this is kind of my drill power station. I have my, it's all my Ryobi drill battery products here. They're not all drills. So I have like an angle grinder right here. This is one of my favorite tools ever, the Ryobi hot glue gun. Have that there. I have a lot of my my drill bits up here. Then my batteries and kind of miscellaneous stuff lives up there. And then a charger on here. But this is so heavy, I actually have 2 cleats on the back of it. So for instance, something that's pretty light, like this, my screwdriver holder, which has a lot of stuff on it right now. this is pretty light. So when I take this off, I can kind of just lift it and tip it and pull it out. And you can see that I only have this single cleat back here. So for those of you who aren't familiar with French cleats, and this is kind of your introduction to it, a French cleat is a very convenient system for hanging things. Basically what it is it's two 45-degree cuts that meet. So one cleat's going to be on the wall like this. So it's going to have that 45-degree facing out and up. And then one, let's see if I can demonstrate this best. So we're going to have one on the wall like that. And then our mating piece, which is going to be on like a cabinet or a holder, is basically just going to come down and slot like that. And the weight pulls it forward, but because of the way that it's mated like that, it actually kind of locks it in place. So it becomes kind of a modular self-locking system. So it's great for little holders like this. So this is just I basically just have a cleat on the back. It's a flat piece of plywood where I drilled a bunch of holes so that I could put my different size screwdrivers and things like that in it. I just have it cut at an angle because you could do a rectangle or a square. I wanted it to look a little fancy. And then that just slots here. And whenever I need a screwdriver, it's just kind of right there for me. So they're all kind of organized.
So
anybody? Yeah, go ahead.
I have two questions. One is,
Yeah.
what's the absolute background, the part that you have painted black? And then also, did you do it all in plywood or do you have other woods in there?
Yeah, so the background is just a wall. It's just a drywall wall. It's the back wall of my garage. It was looking pretty funky and gross. It had a bunch of holes in it. So before I started this process, I actually did a bunch of patchwork on it with mud and stuff. And I had some spare dark paint that I thought would be kind of a cool contrast with the plywood that I had. So I went ahead and just painted it. Sometimes when people make French cleat walls, or they'll make French cleat panels, and usually what that entails is they'll cut cleats and they'll affix them to a sheet of plywood and then put that sheet of plywood on the wall. So that's actually a pretty good solution if you don't want to drill quite as much into your wall, or you kind of just want like a smaller panel. There are a couple, and I'll put some links in the chat when I find them, but there are a couple makers on YouTube that they do a lot of stuff with French cleats. One of those name is Frank Howarth, and he has a really cool French cleat system. And usually what he does is he takes a sheet, I think of like 1/2-inch plywood, and then he cuts strips of cleats. So he cuts the individual cleats and then he affixes them on there with glue and like brad nails or something like that. And then he'll go ahead and just hang that sheet on the wall. Either works. For me, I didn't really want to buy a ton more plywood because it would have taken multiple sheets to basically plywood my whole wall. The only material I have on here now is plywood with the occasional piece of like dimensional pine that I have in some of my holders. I went and I bought the plywood 2 sheets to strip down to create all my cleats that I hung on the wall. And I've been using what's left over to make my holders and then whatever scraps. So I have a lot of scraps, plywood and all sorts of things in my garage. So I've just been trying to see what I can come up with scraps, basically.
But George, I would assume that when you put the cleats on the wall, you drove them through the studs in the wall.
Right.
Okay.
So if you are affixing cleats directly to the wall, it's really important that you go into the studs. So I used pretty big screws, like 2.5, 3-inch, like cabinet screws, basically. Let's see if I have any down here. Like the spat screws that you can get at Home Depot are pretty good because they're kind of self-starting. But what I did is I actually came in and I pre-drilled all of my holes with a countersunk bit, so that my my screw heads would be beneath the surface, And that's actually a pretty important step, because if you don't do that and your screw heads are sticking out, when you go to put your holder on the wall, it can kind of put it at a weird angle, which is opposite of the angle that it should be. So the way that I started is I actually ripped a thin piece of plywood and I affixed that to the wall. And then from there, I put I use it kind of as like a hanger, basically. So then I put my first cleat on that, and then I knew that was level and that was straight, and I screwed in there. And then from there, I had a bunch of spacer blocks that I would put in, and then put my cleat down, and then just kind of worked my way up from there. I did pretty much all of it by myself. So you can do it kind of with two hands. It was a little, so my wall runs about, I'm not sure how tall it is, but it is at least 8 feet long at the strips. Some of them are a little bit longer, so sometimes it would kind of pop around a little bit. So a good long level is definitely your friend. I have one of these. I also have a nice drywall square that I used a little bit to make sure everything was kind of in square and aligned. But yeah, as long as you can find your studs and you mark those out clearly before you start, it's going to be a lot easier. I actually had an interesting, you can kind of see a little bit of it. I had an interesting issue with where I was doing my wall. So you can maybe kind of see some lines drawn below the cleats there.
Yeah, we
So
can.
on the other side of my wall is my power box. So my fuse box is on the other side of the wall. So basically right there, I drew a nice square to tell myself, do not put any screws here. Because I'm using pretty big screws. I didn't want any chance that I would hit like my main power bundle of cables or my power box, because that would not be fun. And I opted not to use the two studs closest, just because I didn't want any chance. I don't like screwing with electrical. It's not my thing. So what I did is I actually went out and got the most powerful drywall anchors that I could find, and put those in for my two in the middle. So I know that middle section there is not quite as strong as some of my other sections where I know I'm in all the studs. So for there, I'm going to be putting lighter tools. So like hand tools and general stuff that I need. And then my heavier stuff is always kind of going to be on the periphery for me. So it just kind of depends on what kind of wall you're working with.
So what thickness plywood were you using?
So I'm using, let's see what it says it is. It doesn't say it on there. It's basically 3/4 inch, like roughly 3/4 inch. It might be like, I think it was measured in 30 seconds. It's like 30 seconds or something like that. But 3/4 inch is a pretty good one to use. Some people use 1/2 inch as well. Whatever you choose to use, that has to be your mating cleat piece that you put on your holder or your hanger or whatever has to be the same thickness in order for the cleat to work. So if I put up 3/4 inch on my wall and then I rip down some pieces, at a 45-degree angle as a cleat to put that on the back of my holder, and it was 1/2 inch, what would happen is it might hang there, but it would wobble a bunch and it wouldn't have that nice kind of mating strength that it gets. So yeah, really 1/2 inch. I'm actually going to be building a French cleat wall in my office. There's like an area there where I'm going to organize some stuff that I have in there. I'm probably going to go with a panel. So I'm going to get like a sheet of 1/2 inch plywood, and then I'm going to rip down a bunch of 1/2 inch French cleats, just because I don't want it sticking out too much. And I think that's going to be perfectly fine. I went with 3/4 just because I like the look of it, and I knew I was going to be hanging some pretty heavy stuff, some beefy stuff on here. So it's kind of up to you. There's so many different opinions online, but I like 3/4 inch plywood. Yeah. Did anybody else have any particular questions or concerns about French cleats? So there are a lot of pros and cons when it comes to French cleats. One pro is just that flexibility to just in your workflow move pieces around that work best for you. It's very modular in nature. It works really well for a personal shop because, you know, I can shift stuff around throughout the day when I'm working on stuff. Doesn't work quite as well for like a community shop because of those reasons. It's very easy to move stuff around and nothing really has like a particular home. So that makes stuff harder to find if you have multiple people working in your shop. It's just my shop here in the garage. So I'm fine. I know where everything is because that's where I put it. Another complaint that people have about French cleats is they do collect dust. So if you think about it, I have this on the wall. So this is the face that's against the wall. So this is the wall here like that. And then I have that groove there. If your dust collection in your shop isn't great, which mine I'm still working on, what's going to happen is you're going to get a bunch of particles and dust particles that are going to jam in there. That's a kind of a risk that you run. For me, my plan is just every once in a while, I'm going to take the stuff off and vacuum out. I think it'll work fine for me. Another thing that you can do to mitigate that problem is when you cut your cleat down, I haven't done it on this yet, but when you cut your cleat down, you can actually cut off that sharp tip. And if you go down just a little bit and run it across your table saw or a circular saw or whatever you're using to cut it down, and you create kind of a squared edge there, it actually creates a relief area. So if there is any dust compacted in your cleat on the wall, this still is going to seat fine because you have that wiggle room from that area that you ripped down. I will say French cleats are much easier to make if you have a table saw. They're very hard to make with a circular saw.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. You probably wouldn't get a perfect line, which would kind of screw everything up. So, yeah.
Right. So I ripped down most of my sheet goods with so in the 6-inch kind of pieces. I did that with the circular saw and an edge guide. I had one of those Craig edge guides that kind of runs along it. It was a bit of a struggle, but it worked. When I got to that 45, I had to angle my blade at 45 degrees, and I was trying to cut, pretty small pieces apart. It just was going all over the place. I definitely think it's possible. My saw isn't the most powerful saw, so maybe if you had a more powerful saw or a track saw would work really well.
I bought that Craig jig guide, and it is so far less awesome than the track saw of the Makerspace.
Yes. Craig, they make a track saw as well, but yeah, so a track saw or a table saw are going to be the best tools, I think, to rip down this kind of stuff, depending on how big material you're dealing with. But yeah, with a track saw, you could easily make short work of this, or a table saw. The one problem with a table saw is it can be kind of cumbersome if you're working with a pretty big sheet of plywood to run it across your table saw. So I only have like a job site size table saw, which is smaller than the one that we have at the space. So it's a lot more balancing. And I haven't built my off-feed table yet. That's in process. But if you had an off-feed table, I think it'd be easier.
But even if you don't have an off-feed table, it's pretty easy with PVC pipes, because I didn't have an off-feed table for the longest time. You can make PVC pipes on pieces that go up and down so that you can feed it in and feed it out. But at the same time, he's absolutely right. Say we get a pandemic again, you can just leave your piece of plywood outside my house, and then I'll leave the pieces. Since I have a saw stop, and so I don't lose any fingers and lose any kids. So a lot of people have been borrowing electricity from my house to work in their garage. So don't hesitate to ask, because I'd be more than happy.
We appreciate that, Kathy. Yeah, I figured it was about time to get a couple tools. So I was thinking about getting a saw stop. For me, I think it's something that will happen at some point in the future. maybe when I'm a little bit more serious and a little bit less hobbyist about woodworking and stuff. But the wall or the Bosch kind of job site saws, they work pretty well. You just have to be careful because it doesn't have that nice safety feature.
But no, the new Bosch contractor saw does have the saw stock capability.
Really?
Is it in the U.S.? I thought that wasn't available in the U.S. Is it now?
Yes, it is now. And the cool thing about it is it doesn't ruin your blade. And you get 2, I don't know, explosions or whatever you want to call it, 2 savings out of each cartridge.
Right. Wow.
Interesting. I was not aware of that. That's cool. Yeah, Bosch makes good tools. So there are a bunch of different good manufacturers. Yeah. So
George,
I thought, go for it. Yeah.
Oh, by the time you're done with your wall, what percentage of your tool collection will be available and not in a drawer?
That is a good question. So for me, most of my big tools, so like my power tools, are probably going to be on my wall. So it's both. It's kind of aesthetic and function sort of. So it's nice to kind of have. Now I have this nice kind of showpiece in the back where I have all my tools out, and I can see that, and then like other people can see that. It's nice to have some of those tools that you definitely need like close at hand. Like so, for instance, like it's nice to finally have my screwdrivers kind of all collected. That being said, this is not all the screwdrivers that I own. I have many more screwdrivers, but those are probably going to go live in a drawer somewhere. So for me, it's getting out kind of the minimum or the stuff that I'm very actively using, so that's at hand. And then if there's ever a time where I'm not using something, that I might actually put it away somewhere in storage. So I do have a bench, kind of like a workbench. It's more of a storage cabinet that I have my stuff on top of, that I have some pretty good storage in. I'm lucky, so I'm working out of a 2-car garage. Eventually, 1 car is going to pull in here, but this side over here is basically all just going to be woodworking stuff. And I do have a storage room in here as well. So in terms of percentage, maybe like 60% of my tools would be out. And then 40 of it would probably be in storage somewhere where I know where it is, hopefully, or jammed in a drawer somewhere as that happens.
So I have, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go on, Deanna. No, stop.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I have a question that's kind of tangentially related.
Yeah.
You mentioned about putting plywood on the walls, and I have a basement shop that's studded out. And I would love to do that to plywood, but I'm having a hard time finding out building codes or like fire codes. Is that, does anyone know? Is that like a fire risk if I start a fire? Will I? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know for certain. What I would say is if it's like properly insulated, maybe with like a fire retardant insulation, you're probably fine just going ahead and paneling all your walls with plywood. I think that's what we did in the space. So the wood shop is all OSB chipboard for the walls.
Okay, so it is OSB. All right.
Yeah, which I think you might need to check depending on where you are. And Decatur, if you're in Decatur, it might be a little bit more strict than just
Brookhaven. Oh, I'm in Brookhaven.
Gotcha. I would, my gut feeling would be that it would be fine.
I'm in city of Atlanta, and I have my standalone backyard office is insulated OSB, and it was permitted by the city of Atlanta.
Really? Okay. Okay. That's
Yeah.
good to know.
So in a shop like that, you could use wrench cleats for sure.
Without the walls?
Yeah, you could use, so you could actually just put them on your studs if you want. You could go ahead and hang plywood and then put them on the plywood. Another thing you could do if you have the opportunity to just actually go ahead and put plywood like OSB or whatever you're putting up, you could actually just create tool holders that you could just drill into your plywood.
Oh, wow, yeah.
You can go ahead and skip the whole
Cleat.
cleat thing. That's basically what's kind of been the strategy that Kevin's been using at the makerspace. So I think before we had to shut down for quarantine, there were a few tool holders that he had up there, like the hammer holders and the crowbar holder and stuff, where it's just, you basically can just drill it right into the plywood. I just didn't have really the option to do that because, one, I didn't want to buy all the plywood. And two, my girlfriend didn't want me to cover the entire back wall of our garage in plywood. So this is kind of the compromise. But yeah, if I had a garage that was just studs, which some garages are like that, and like on the interior, I probably would have just paneled the area with plywood, maybe painted it a couple fun colors or something like that, done some logos underneath, and then just drilled into it. Because you can create pretty cool holders and just pop in a nice screw, and you can move it around whenever you want too. Just kind of patch of wood filler.
So, 2 questions. One is, do you have a screw in every stud? And then the number 2 is, for what you just showed us, like your screwdriver holder, and I saw a cabinet up there and some other things. Did you come up with those designs, or did you just kind of find them on the internet somewhere and then just kind of tweak it from there?
Yeah, so for the studs, yes, I have, for the span of, let's get a further view back. For my span here, every area where I have a cleat that's crossing and it's covering a stud, there is a screw, just to make sure that I have that strength. In some of the areas you can see, like here, the screws are spaced a little bit closer. That's because I actually put in those anchors instead of going into the stud, because I didn't want to go anywhere near that power box area that I drew. But yeah, so everywhere that I could, I put in a screw and a stud. My cleats actually ended in an area right here where there wasn't a stud. So I put another anchor in the end just to kind of make sure that it's going to be good there. So that's something that you're going to want to account for when you are deciding on the length of the cleats you want to use. You at least are going to want to use a cleat if you want a bigger area that stretches between 2 studs, right? So you could use, so for French cleats can be used for all sorts of things. So you can use them for hanging pictures in your house or decorations, things like that. When I do that, usually I'll use like 1/2-inch plywood because it's a little bit thinner, and I'll find one good stud. I'll put my cleat kind of centered on that, and I'll just drill it into there, and that kind of holds it. But for things I'm going to be taking on and off or moving around that are pretty heavy, at least you want a couple studs. In terms of design, I did do a fair amount of research, like Pinterest boards and all sorts of different things. Just Google images, French cleat holder design things. So some of them are inspired by that. Some of them are incredibly simple. So this is one of my favorites just because of how simple it is. This is my hammer, and my levels also fit in there holder. Basically what I have here, I just had a flat piece of square plywood scrap, and I needed a place to put my hammers and my mallets. So I took a couple long screws, I drove them in there. I can hang them up, and then I put a cleat on the back. So it's pretty easy for me to take this off, move it around. I had some room here for my little levels. One thing that I definitely used, kind of modified a plan for, was this here, this drill station. There are lots of different ones like of this variety that you can find online. I forget the name of the woodworker that put out the plans. But if you look up drill charging station or French cleat drill charging stations, there's a few videos, and they're all kind of building off of this design. But it's a pretty simple thing. I took some extra steps. I actually went ahead and cut some dados into my plywood to kind of slot my shelves together. And then this area down here is nice because I can just kind of pull my tools and slot them in and out. It's kind of like in the space where we have for the drills, so we use the PVC. PVC tubing, I think like 3-inch tubing or 2.5-inch tubing works really well as well. You could just attach that and that will hold your tools pretty well. Some things, like I had already had this docket system thing from Ryobi for all of my drill bits. So I just went ahead and put a cleat on the back of it. So that's what a cleat looks like when you put it on there. And just put it on the wall. Pretty simple stuff. My tape one is pretty simple as well. It's literally just a flat board that I cut some strips of plywood and I went ahead and...
George, we're losing you verbally.
Sorry. It started raining, so my Wi-Fi is probably bad.
Same here. You must be in Decatur.
Close.
Yeah.
But so this is basically, again, just flat plywood. I just put some tape on there and I scribed circles.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can turn my light on. I scribed some circles, make sure it fit. And then what I did is I actually just took these, I put a little bit of super glue and some activator to make sure they are held in place. Then I came from the bottom, countersunk, and drilled in like a 2-inch screw there. So these are pretty solid. They're not going anywhere. I got some wood glue, some super glue, and then a nice screw kind of going through it. I have
Do you have pre-built cleats already, kind of like a whole stack of them ready to go, or you make them on the fly when you need them?
So I actually had a bunch. So I ripped up a whole sheet and a half of plywood, but I didn't need all of it for my wall. So I had a bunch of strips kind of ready to go. You can see I have a couple back here still. So these are all French Cleat ripped strips that I'll use. So what I do is I build my tool holder. I measure on the back to just about the whole size of the holder. And then I take it over to the miter saw and cut it. For the back, the cleats actually don't need to be quite as thick or quite as tall, rather, I guess would be the right word. They don't have to be quite as tall as the cleats you put on the wall. So this is the thickness of the cleat I have on the wall. If I were going to put it on a tool holder, what I would do is I would actually go ahead and cut it to size, and then I'd probably rip about 1 inch off the top, just so that I had enough good surface area to put a little bit of glue and some screws through, but it doesn't need to be quite as large. That way it's easier to get on and off. You can use the exact same size cleat if you want, but just ripping it down a little bit makes it easier to lift it on and off. But there are tons and tons of different plans and designs. French cleat holders. One of the guys I really like who actually kind of inspired me to do this, he has a YouTube channel called Fisher's Shop. He makes some really cool stuff, and he has a really amazingly dry sense of humor, like bad dad jokes, which are pretty good. I would recommend checking him out. Actually, I can see if I can put a link in the chat to his channel. So he has, I think, a basement kind of shop deal as well. And he's gone ahead and created a whole bunch of French cleats, and his tool holders are much prettier than mine. Mine are just kind of cobbled together. He actually takes some pretty serious time putting his together. But that's his YouTube channel there that I'd recommend checking out. He's really cool. So one holder that I was inspired by a plan and then I kind of winged it was my, so this is my circular saw French cleat holder. Sorry. There we go. I need to go to cameraman school, I guess. Joel can help me with that.
You're doing great.
This is basically, it's held in by gravity. So what it is, you can see it's just a flat piece here, and it's attached to 2 triangles that I cut. Basically a size, just I wanted to make sure. So if you're hanging something a little bit heavier, it's good to make sure that your holder is going to come in contact with at least 2 cleats on the back. So this seats in the top cleat, and then this area here rests on another cleat, and that kind of holds the weight a little bit better. Then I just have my cleat attached across the back here. Just used a jigsaw to cut out a slot. That's where the blade will fit. And then I nailed I screwed just some strips of plywood here that kind of create like a holding, like a bracket to hold it in, and then something on top. So that way it won't flip out. So I can take the whole thing off the wall if I want, or if I just want to use my circular saw, I can pretty easily just slide that in there, slide it out like that. That's a pretty cool one that I enjoyed making. They are, let's see if I can get a few. So they're really easy to just go ahead and put up on the wall. Sometimes they tend to be a little top heavy, but I can just go ahead and put that there. And it might be hard to see, but this is what I was talking about. So I have my top cleat here, and then it comes down. It's just enough length so that it's able to rest on my second cleat here. And I want that because this is pretty heavy. So anything that's pretty heavy, you're going to want to have enough of kind of a backer area that it's going to rest on another cleat. So I have that for, you can probably see I have some cabinets back here, pretty janky cabinets, but these are actually on 2 different cleats. And I actually went ahead and put 2 cleats on it. So those are pretty secure. So I keep all my finishes and stains and stuff in there. And then my drill charging station is across a couple of cleats as well. It's just about 3, I think.
So George, when you did the janky cabinets, did you put 1 cleat on it, hang it up, measure it, and then put the other cleat on it? Or how did you do that?
Yeah, good question. So actually what I did was I put 1 cleat across level and flush on the top of it. I went ahead and put it on the wall. I took another cleat that I cut to the same size as the top cleat, and I kind of just, from the side, I just slid it behind the cabinet. And I measured and made some markings inside my cabinet to know where that cleat, where that surface to drill into would be. And then I just reached in and drove a couple screws from the back of the cabinet. So they're complete boxes, basically. So there's a back piece that I could just drill into the cleats. You could do it without a back if you wanted. You would just have to drill into the sides. You would probably have to do that off of the cleat and just measure to make sure your spacing is fine. But you'd be risking getting a ton of dust in the back of your cabinet without a back.
Yeah, I like your method better.
But yeah, that's actually one way that they hang cabinets in kitchens pretty commonly if they're doing it right. They'll put kind of some up there, and they'll get a couple screws in, and they'll test, and then they'll mark, and then they'll get a couple nice cabinet screws in. So sometimes it'll be just like a cleat. They're hanging it up on the top, and then someone's kind of below holding it up, and then someone goes in and puts in a couple more cabinet screws. And those cabinet screws usually have that kind of pan head to them that really holds them in there well. So that's actually what I used on the back of mine. You probably couldn't really see right now because they're full of stuff. They're full of stain and paint and all sorts of finishes and whatnot.
George, how would you mount baskets? It seems a lot of the wire sort of gym style baskets that I'm partial to, they're stackable, which means they're not a perfect cube, which means they wouldn't easily mount level and flush? How would you mount that?
Baskets. So I actually have something like this that I was thinking about. So this is actually from an old pegboard kind of system. I had pegboard up for a little while. I don't really like pegboard all that much. But I was trying to figure out a way to go ahead and turn this into like a tool holder that I could use. Maybe put my measuring tapes and pencils or something in there. Probably what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take advantage of what I have here and just drill some holes and kind of put it in. You could actually use like a 5-minute epoxy or something if you wanted to glue your piece to like a piece of plywood or cleat or something like that. That would work pretty well. Construction adhesive, like the liquid nails kind of stuff. You could, I mean, depending on how heavy it is and what you're putting in it, one idea is you could actually go ahead and just loop zip ties. So you could just kind of mark where it comes through, where you could get some purchase from them, drill through your plywood, and then just run some zip ties through there.
You almost need a sort of a triangular shaped kind of shim to keep it behind it, to keep it level. Is what I'm thinking. Yeah.
So you could create like an L-shaped holder. Pieces. So if I were going to like make a holder for this, maybe what I would do is I'd get a piece of plywood that I know that would fit on, like that. And then what I could do is I could grab another piece. This is just scrap, and I could create kind of an L piece like that. So I would glue and screw that together. I might actually, if that were the case, I might cut these off with like an angle grinder, or just drill a slot or cut a slot so I could slot that down into it so they would sit flush. Or I could leave them facing out like that. That would work too.
Yeah, make a shelf, really put it on.
I'm not super OCD. I mean, if you're looking for super aesthetic stuff, I would recommend looking up French Cleat Germans. They make some crazy stuff. Some German shops are just insanely over-engineered. But I would probably do something like that. I'd put some screws in. Let's see, how did I get this on camera? I put some screws in here. Then I would take my cleat and I would cut it to size. So I'd probably cut it to about that. And then I would just go ahead and put it on there, and then I'd just hang it up like that. If I was worried about this slipping off, I could get some thin strips of plywood and maybe a slightly bigger piece and kind of create like a little frame along it to kind of hold it in place. Or I could just put some super glue. Put some super glue on the bottom if I had the ability to do that, and just kind of hold it in place there. So it kind of depends. I don't really have a lot of baskets or like bins that I plan on putting up here. Probably just this one, and this is honestly probably just the way I'm going to do it. I might actually cut pieces that fit it a little bit better. This is just the scrap that I'm laying around. So one thing that if you check out, and let me pull a link to his YouTube.
You want to make sure that the...
So this is a really good thing to watch for a process on how to put cleats together. So this is Frank Howarth. He has one of the most insane shops I've seen in all of YouTube. He actually has 2 table saws butted up against each other. So his off-feed table for his table saw is another table saw. It's like a Powermatic table saw. One of them he only uses for ripping. One of them he only uses for cross cutting. It's interesting. He's like a barn that he's in, and he has huge lathe and all sorts of stuff. But he does a lot of really cool organizational stuff, including designing and making a lot of French cleat holders on the CNC. So that's something I probably will do once we can get back into the space. I'm gonna probably be coming up with a couple easy designs. So, you know, for now, what I did is I just cut some triangles and I used that. But if I had access to a CNC, I might come up with like a basic form of a holder like this, and then take in a piece of plywood and just batch out a whole bunch of them so that I had them and I could come back and I could just put tops on them and make all sorts of holders like this. So hanging a basket, you could probably do pretty easily like that. You could also make kind of like a basket out of just strips of plywood. But I would, if you are interested going down the French cleat rabbit hole, as I have, I would recommend checking out his channel, because I think his entire house is made out of French cleats. I'm not 100% sure, but it just seems that way when you watch.
He's such a good cinematographer too. He puts so much effort into his videos, man.
He does, yeah. Like he mounts
GoPros on the head of the CNC and lets the camera move with the CNC. All kinds of cool stuff.
Yeah, he does a lot of the cool like stop motion kind of stuff as well. So he's definitely a great resource, much better resource than I am to check out.
Yeah, when you were actually, I saw that on your where you've got your pliers and stuff. As soon as you showed that, which you got, you know, like 3 bars or something, I was thinking immediately CNC would be perfect for that, to just have the holes, you know, the width basically to drop in all the various different pieces of pliers and so forth.
Right. So if you want to be, so for me, my strategy is just kind of make stuff that works, that I can put stuff on and see it so that I know where it is. If you want to be like super precise, yeah, you could dial in exactly how big of a pocket you need on the CNC to fit your big pliers versus your little pliers. And that way they'll always have a particular home and you'll know where they are. This is my plier one is actually a fun one that I made, because basically it's just scrap. So I have these triangles here, and then I took strips. I think they're about 3/4 of an inch to an inch wide strips here. Probably a little bit easier to see like that. And the way it works, I can put lots of different things in here. You can see I have my framing squares in here, but you just take pliers, this is some wire cutters, and they just slide down like that. So that fits really well. If you're using like a wrench style kind of plier, if it doesn't quite fit, it will actually spread out and it will hold itself in place. So this, I'm probably going to build a couple more of these because these are just really simple. You can use it as a shelf if you want. So if I wanted to, I could just put my tape measure on there. I'd see it. I know where it was. But yeah, this is actually, I think the last one I made was this one. I'm still kind of in the process. I've just been busy with other stuff. But it's just a super simple solution. Or if you want, I mean, like, so I'm going to put my framing squares in here because it works. But if you want to put your framing squares more on display, you could create a French cleat that kind of displays them. So you could, let me grab down a couple of my bigger ones to kind of show you what I mean.
Yeah, I think in the maker space, in the woodworking area, we actually have slots that they drop into.
Yeah. So it's similar to that. This is the first one I made. This one's for my saw, hacksaw.
Love it.
So basically here we just got a flat piece of plywood. I cut it so that it's about the size of my tool. And then what I did was I came in with just some pine. This is just like a 2x4 that I cut up. This is actually one of my spacer blocks that I used when I hung my French cleats. It just kind of worked out that I could reuse it. So I put some glue on it, a little bit of wood glue, a little bit of super glue, put some heavy on it, let it sit for about an hour. And after they were in place, came back and you can see,
Yeah.
kind of went crazy. Want to make sure it's not coming down, but just countersunk and put in some screws, and that just holds it in place. But this is actually pretty cool because it really displays the tool. So
Yeah.
this is the rest for this, and then you can see on here that I took it to my table saw, and I kept running it through on the corners until it fit nicely through here. If you wanted to, you could kind of hand sand that, or if you had a sander, you could kind of sculpt it more. But it just kind of sits like that, and I'm not using it. I can just go ahead and put it up on the wall. So I have a couple like that. I don't use this tool a ton. I've used it in the last couple of weeks to do some gardening. Don't use it for a lot of woodworking.
I think it's the potential of this system is what really turns me on to this thing. Like, you know, like it really is just the base that you could do anything on, which is.
Yeah, it's very like IKEA modular-esque.
Yeah.
So it's perfect for like a personal shop because you can personalize it. You can make it crazy OCD, color coordinated, you know, if you want to paint each of them, or you just kind of make, you know, stuff out of scraps, throw it up there. You can do somewhere kind of in between. This is another one that I made.
You used your hand saw for gardening?
Yeah, they cut some trees down in my yard.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, reticulated, I use that all the time.
You weren't using it to break up the earth or anything.
A week ago, I was actually climbed up a tree at a neighbor's house and was one-handed cutting branches for him. So
yeah,
those things are great.
They do break up soil pretty well too.
Yeah,
just jam it in the ground. And
yeah, I was like, gardening?
Yeah.
So I made this one. This is a pretty fun one. So this is for my angle grinder. So here, this is the camera. I'm looking at my computer. So I have a couple of dowels coming out, and these hold my discs. So I have my small discs and my large cutting discs. And then this, my angle grinder actually sits in kind of a little pocket area that I made. It's just 2 pieces of plywood that I created a V with. I glued them down after it was dry, came in here, put some screws in. So this block here actually holds it at the right angle so it doesn't tip off. And then I have these here, which actually will move back and forth. They just put them in with one kind of shorter screw. And that kind of helps make sure that when I put this in here, I can lock these in place, and I know that's not coming out. So I actually live pretty close to train tracks, close enough so that when they're big old freight trains too. So when like the big old freight trains come by, the house gets a good wobble. So kind of my biggest fear was I'm gonna put one of these things up, and in the middle of the night I'm just gonna hear a crash, bang, and it's gonna like drop on something that like I'm working on, like a nice box or something that I'm finishing on, or breaking a tool. So I always make sure that there's like an extra bit of length, so these aren't going to come off because they have the really long dowels, or there's some sort of locking mechanism for the tool. So like the saw that I just showed you, that piece on the handle sticks out about a good 8 inches beyond the tool, but that just means it's never going to come off on its own. Only a person can take it off. My cat might try. She lives out here. I'm not sure if she's strong enough.
So George, are we gonna go back to, yeah, I'm gonna mute my mic so I can use the saw.
Sure, yeah, I can do that. I can,
for an entire hour.
yeah, I can make one real quick. Let's go ahead and make something for our basket to sit on. So I'm actually gonna go ahead and make a quick shelf, basically, for my basket to sit on. I'll rib up some cleats. I'll attach it to it. Nice. Looks like I got a nice piece of scrap plywood that I can use.
You're gonna need to rotate your camera to our left or to your right so we can see it just a little bit.
Sure. Is that what you want to see?
Yep.
Like that? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go ahead and take some measurements on here. I just have a scrap piece of plywood. I'm gonna cut it up so that this can sit on there. Maybe cut off some strips so that I can kind of frame it in with strips. And I'll cut a piece so that I can put like an L on it. And that will be a holder. So I'll go ahead and mute my mic because you guys probably don't want to hear my miter saw and my table saw. But if you have a question, just let me know because I'll still be able to hear you.
We can't hear you when you talk. You just talked and we couldn't hear you.
Would it be easier if I shared my screen so that was a bigger view if you guys want to watch me build something? So I could do
think
this.
so.
Oh, I'm not the host, so I can't do that. Never mind. Only Kevin can do that, and he is not here anymore. All right. Awesome. Thanks, Kevin.
I just pinned
Or is he?
your screen so it's bigger.
Kevin is here creeping.
Just very
Kevin, your
quiet.
face is so orange these days. Did you go get a tan?
Yeah, and you can tell my hair is a little out of control.
Yeah, it's arcing everywhere.
All right, Kevin, you are a very scary man.
All right, here we go. Let's see a little bit better.
This is going to be the quietest table saw we've ever seen.
This is my dream table saw.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's really freaky watching him between his host screen and his direct feed.
Very nice. Yeah.
Oh, such the Decatur maker. Eye protection, ear protection, and now he's ready to go.
Modeling good behavior.
I'm actually looking for my respirator too because I don't like breathing in plywood sawdust.
Seems like
Did
nowadays
you
all over the place.
check up on the wall?
Yeah, it should be on the wall. That's the problem. It's not. I was wearing it earlier today.
You don't have a cleat for that?
You know, you can use a bandana if you have one.
No, I bet he had a cleat for that, but he moved it around.
You know,
I also have a table full of junk on the other side of the garage that I'm in the process of making cleats for and putting stuff away. You guys can see my wonderful quarantine hair as well. It's getting out of control.
don't
Yeah,
even go there.
That was record time in finding something. Just saying.
Yeah, really.
I'm looking for something. It would have been a good 10 minutes.
That's my junk table.
But more importantly, we see your cat.
Oh.
All right, so now I have my base piece that my basket is gonna rest on. I'm gonna go ahead and cut a piece to create kind of my L to put on here. Though I'm gonna use that side because that side looks a little bit cleaner. I think I used this plywood for something before and just kind of salvaging, but it's good to use your scraps. You can. Let's see. I do a lot of stuff by eye. Sometimes I do stuff by measurement, but I like to kind of hold stuff up until it looks good. Doesn't need to be that tall. How tall do we want it to be? Yeah, I think 5 inches would work, which is what I have this all set to. So I'll go ahead and rip another piece. All right, so now I have my 2 pieces. It's really simple. L, I'm gonna go ahead and probably put a little bit of glue right here. Back here with my countersink bit and some screws. I have some an 1.5 inch construction screws here that work pretty well. Probably use those. They're fairly strong. I don't really have to worry about the length quite as much because I am going in an area where it's pretty long. But I find that the 1.25 inch ones work pretty well when you're just combining two pieces like that to 3/4 plywood, which is what I'll do when I put my cleat on there. Yeah. So I have my handy dandy glue shelf here that I made. Grab some glue. Also grab a paper towel. So I always get glue all over my hands whenever I glue anything up. Actually, I'm gonna grab my drill with my countersink bit, and this one, oh, nice, it already has this back head. So it should be pretty easy.
George, any reason for Type Bond 3 versus Type Bond 2?
Tip-on 3 is all I have.
Okay.
It's pretty much all I buy because I use it for a lot of stuff. But yeah, Type-on 2 would work fine. Oh, I lied. I actually do have one other thing. I have Type-on extended glue time. I would not use this because it takes a while to dry. You probably could get away with not using glue as well, but yeah, I would just buy 3.
Okay. Just checking to make sure there wasn't something I didn't know, since I have both, and then I have the Type Bond like a half where it's, you know, white and really sticky and.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Well, if I ever want to put this underwater, it will survive for longer, I guess. But,
Yeah.
The bit
yeah,
right now, is that basically a countersink on a drill bit?
yeah. So this is it's actually just a DeWalt one, I think, but you can get lots of different ones. But this is just so it's a drill bit to drill my pilot hole, and then a countersink bit on it there. So it works really nicely.
Can you adjust that up and down? I've
Yeah, you
honestly,
can. You use an Allen
Yeah.
wrench and you can
Yeah.
adjust it up and down if you want.
So right there.
I mean,
Wow.
it's,
I've never seen that. I just have a countersink. I don't have that. That's cool. I love that.
Yeah, either of them work. So this is what I use to hang on my cleats. So it's actually a bit of like a tapered drill bit on this one. Some of them are more straight drill bits. But yeah, it's just really convenient because you can do it all at once. You just pop in, and you're good.
I'm
once
making a
you
list
start
of
using them,
tools.
Paul, you won't go back.
I know.
Yes.
I've got the list of tools that I want. It's already started.
Nice. Yeah, this is just a simple DeWalt one that I got, but you definitely can order sets of them online. Kathy probably knows a good brand. I imagine.
Well,
she
no,
heard.
I mean, I have the DeWalt 3. There's 3 of them in a pack that you get from Home Depot, and I've
Yeah.
used them for years.
Yeah,
And
they work.
yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm gonna turn my mic off because you guys probably don't want to hear my drill.
Hey, George, if you can, show them the drill hole.
Yeah, I freaking love that idea. I mean, I have to do that in 2 steps and it's never exactly the same. So that's such a great solution.
And Paul, if you add that with the spack screw, see how the spack screw goes in?
Yeah, that's what I use all the time.
Definitely, you can easily put a plug over it.
Yeah. I love it. That is just learning something new. I love it.
Well, somebody I used to work with introduced me to spack screws, and I haven't gone back since I found them.
Yeah, I've done a lot of deck repairs over the years, so I've used them a long time for just generic woodworking stuff. In fact, I used them tonight actually. I was putting up lights and Edison lights in our porch, and just needed to put something in there. But yeah, that's great. I'm so happy.
I'm actually going to go ahead and use some of my offcuts and cut some thin strips to just kind of put here to just kind of hold it so that it won't kind of slide back and forth. Not really necessary. Basically, this is going to be a shelf, glorified shelf. But if I put a couple things there, so let's make sure that it doesn't come off. So I'll go rip. Oh, I got a piece on the table saw that I can use. I will go ahead and rip probably like 3/4 of an inch. Something like that.
When he comes back, one of the things I'm curious about is like, are there like standard widths does he use?
I think it's more than 3/4, and then after that, it's all.
Well, yeah, on the plywood, but I meant like, does he make them all like 1 foot, 18 inch, 2 foot, like in 6-inch increments, or is it just kind of free form, whatever you need, you make?
It's freeform. I think it's freeform, whatever he needs, and then he slides them together. But George,
Yeah, it's definitely freeform. A few of them have been kind of a particular size, but usually I make it to fit what I want to put on there. So, like for instance, sorry for the bad camera, but like that one I made so that a roll of paper towels could fit on it. This one I wanted at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bays. You know, that the length of a tool, basically. Then I have my sandpaper one, just enough to fit sandpaper. This is probably my most important one here, just my shelf for my music player. Yeah, I just made that to fit.
Music player.
Yeah.
I guess as long as you're not going to be filling up 100% of it or close to it, then the spacing just doesn't matter, because you can reconfigure and move it all around. It would be only if it's a tight fit you'd have to worry about, 6-inch or foot or whatever increments.
Yeah, and you could certainly do it at particular increments. I like winging stuff, so that's just kind of my style. I like winging it. But I mean, if you wanted to plan stuff out, that you could actually draw some pretty cool stuff up in like simple CAD or like a 3D modeling program to make sure everything kind of fits, looks nice. I will probably do that for my interior French cleat panel in my office to make that look a little bit nicer. But out in the shop, just as long as it works, it's good for me.
Cool.
Hey, you guys, I'm going to take off. Thanks. Thanks, George. Don't stop. No, I'm leaving. Bye.
I'm gonna go ahead and just put some glue on here. I could put some screws in here, but because it's the edge grain of my plywood, there's a fair amount of chance, or a fair chance that it will split. So honestly,
Air gun.
glue, I think is gonna do the trick. Let's see. I might put a couple screws just to make sure that it holds. So sometimes I follow plans, and I plan out my cuts and I batch them out and things like that. But when it comes to shop furniture kind of stuff or shop organization, unless it's like a really big, like a cabinet or something that I'm working on, or like a workbench, I'm going to be building a workbench in the next few weeks. I usually just kind of wing it like I'm doing right now.
I'm gonna head out too, but thank you. This was really cool. I'm definitely gonna play with this in the future.
Yeah. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Hopefully I answered some questions and kind of showed you some of the process. But yeah, I'm happy to bounce any ideas. I'm by no means an expert on it, but I'm a couple of weeks into it, so I can tell you about some don't do that kind of things.
Cool. Looks great. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thanks. Have a great
Thanks,
night.
Paul.
I gotta head out too, but this has been totally awesome. And I will be bouncing some things off you. Thanks, George.
Yeah. I might call it a night myself, have some dinner, but I'll post a picture of this and some of the other things that I complete in the next few days. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, guys. Thanks for asking great questions. Now, yeah, you can kind of see my face now. Hope you had fun.
Thanks, George.
Bye.
Bye. No,